I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Rosie. I am Catherine, I am the CEO of WANBAM, and I'm going to be chatting to Rosie a little bit about her career, what she finds inspiring about effective altruism, and in general some advice for people who are considering a career path like Rosie's. So Rosie Campbell is a program lead at the Partnership on AI. She is interested in the safe development of AI for the long-term flourishing of humanity, including areas like global cooperation strategy and responsible publication norms for machine learning research. So Rosie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody.
So Rosie, I'm just going to ask you a quick question about your background. So what did you do before you started at PAI?
So for my undergraduate degree, I studied physics and philosophy, and I then did a master's in computer science. And I wasn't thinking in any way strategically at this point. I was basically just following whatever seemed interesting to me. Luckily now that has ended up being a really useful kind of triangulation of things I've studied, but like at the time I was just following interests. And after that, I joined the BBC in the UK as a research engineer in their R&D department. So that was like developing new technologies for broadcasting and media and just like a real variety of stuff. And so in that role, I was much more building software and prototypes and technical things. So it was more on the technical end of things. And one of the projects I was working on was looking at how we can use machine learning to potentially automate the role of a camera operator or a director. So if you think about like how to frame shots or like when to switch between different shots, we were trying to train a model to do that automatically. And that's kind of what ended up drawing me towards machine learning and AI. And the more I learned about it, the more I was interested in it and thought it seemed like a high impact thing. And so after discovering effective altruism, which I'm sure we can get into in a bit, and like chatting with 80,000 hours and that kind of thing, I ended up moving to the role at CHAI, the Centre for Human Compatible AI at UC Berkeley. And the role there was much more operations focused. So I'd gone from like a very technical research engineering role to like an operations/management type role. And it was a bit of a big change and kind of had no idea what I was doing, had to learn it all from scratch, but a great experience for like skill development. But I just found that I was missing some of the more researchy aspects of it. And so I ended up moving to Partnership on AI in July last year. And I think the role that I'm in now is a really nice balance of doing some of the kind of project management style operation stuff, but also getting to dive deeply into more of the kind of meaty research areas that I'm interested in as well.
Awesome, thanks. Can you tell me a little bit more about your current role at Partnership on AI?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a program lead, which is a pretty varied role. I've realized that I am someone who really likes variety. I'm definitely more of a generalist. And it basically is a mix of project management, research, stakeholder engagement, just generally kind of trying to strategize about how to achieve project goals and do whatever is needed to make that happen. The project that I'm currently working on looks at publication norms in machine learning. And the logic behind that is that as we are developing increasingly advanced AI systems, the way that we disseminate the research behind them is going to be like a key lever in how well we can maximize the benefits of those things and minimize the risks. So I'm looking at the point of publication and how we can develop better publication norms as a community so that we are minimizing potential risks. And so in that role, I am hosting meetings with different representatives from partner organizations. I should probably say a little bit about what PAI is in case people aren't familiar. So Partnership on AI is a non-profit and it's got a mission to benefit people in society. So basically it's looking at how to shape the development of AI in a responsible way. And it's made up of a huge number of partner organizations spanning industry, academia, and civil society non-profits. So things like Amnesty International, ACLU, that kind of thing. So what we're trying to do is essentially leverage that whole community that has a lot of different perspectives to try and make progress on some of these like thorny issues in responsible AI. So a lot of what I'm doing is being in contact with representatives from those organizations, hosting events and meetings for them, drafting documents, getting their feedback on them, coming up with tools and prototypes that we can then like test out in their organizations, a real mix of things like that.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think that like trying to get collaboration on such a broad scale must be just, yeah, incredibly inspiring and yeah, sometimes quite challenging.
Yeah.
So with regards to the projects that you're running at the second, what are some key topic areas that you're particularly focusing on?
In the work that I'm currently doing at PAI?
Yeah.
Yeah, so one thing that I'm super interested in is the idea of like whose job is it to anticipate the risks of research? I think there's a real split in opinions on this. Some people think it should be the researchers' role themselves to assess the risks of their work. But the challenge with that is often a researcher is an expert in their very narrow like technical domain, but they might not be able to they might not have the skills to understand the second and third order effects of their work. You know, you need sociology and economics and politics and history to have a much more rounded impression of that. So I think it can be quite a big ask for researchers to do that. But on the other hand, I think absolving researchers of any responsibility is probably not a great way to go either, because then whose job is it to understand the risks, the potential risks of advanced research? There are like different mechanisms we could put in place, like we could have review boards or like peer review for risks and that kind of thing, but those are like they often have problems within themselves. A lot of people have bad experiences with academic review boards. They can be quite bureaucratic and things like that. So I think there's a real challenge here to collectively take responsibility for the research. It's kind of a collective action problem. Like we all want to minimize the risks, but it's not clear exactly whose responsibility that should be, or you know, who's best placed to do it. So that's one of the things I'm thinking about. And then I'm generally thinking also about how we can build incentive structures to encourage more responsible behaviors across the AI ecosystem. So a lot of obviously the big tech companies who are our partners are working under a certain set of incentives, and even if the individuals at those organizations really care about doing things responsibly and ethically, which often they do, like it's a really nice part of my job to be able to meet these very like intelligent and passionate people at these companies, they're still working within this bigger structure, which is sometimes hard to it's hard to do the right thing, as you might say, when there are all these different incentives at play. So something I'm very interested in is thinking about like how can we create incentive structures so that it's in the interest of the companies to behave in a more responsible way.
Yeah, and so I've known Rosie since she was like back in Manchester, so it's just been such a pleasure to like look at Rosie's career as it's just gone boom. But like, what are some key lessons that you've learned across this like incredible path over the last couple of years?
As I mentioned earlier, my choice of what to study at university was not at all strategic, but has worked out pretty well for me. And so something I often tell people is that like it can be quite useful to just follow your interests and not feel like super pressured to like immediately maximize your impact, or try and like second guess what is the like most prestigious thing you can do, even if it's not exactly what you enjoy. So I think sometimes people underrate like learning about yourself and what your interests are, and like feeling okay following those, even if it's not immediately obvious how that's going to cash out into impact. I think also I would, if I could go back now to like my university age self, I would want to be a much more competent human in general. Like I think I put a lot of effort into being like more organized and more productive and developing systems and task management and note taking and all of this, but it's like taken me a long time to get to a point where I'm still not totally happy with it, but I'm definitely a lot better than I was. And so I think a lot of the advice I often give to people who are early in their careers is like invest time in those like meta level things that are just about like making you more productive and efficient, and generally like a competent human.
Yeah. Do you have any particular resources you recommend with regards to developing these skills?
Yeah, oh my gosh, so many. So I'm like someone who procrastinates by watching productivity YouTube videos or watching or reading like blogs about productivity and things like that. So I have so many different things I could recommend. And I think it really definitely depends on what you're trying to improve and the kind of person you are. If you're just starting out, my number one tip is to try and adopt an inbox zero habit. So every day, clearing your inbox down to zero by either responding to any messages, or moving them into your task manager. Get a task manager as well, that's another thing. There's like books like Getting Things Done, which is a really popular one, which I've not actually read, although I have like seen the summary of it. I think personally Getting Things Done is a bit overkill in terms of like there's a lot of overhead to maintain it, and I would suggest adopting a much simpler process initially, which is just about like trying to write down everything you need to do, clearing your inbox, and just trying to stay as much as possible like on top of things so that you're not dropping balls unintentionally. And then in terms of note taking, I would say there's a great piece of software I've been using recently called Rome Research, which is unfortunately it got overloaded because so many people signed up for it that like they had to close the sign up, so you can't sign up for it right now. But just generally getting into a habit of note taking and writing things down. There's a system called the Zettelkasten system, which I have been learning recently, which is really useful for kind of like consolidating your knowledge and being able to spot connections between different ideas you have, especially if you're doing intellectual work that's more research focused. I think having a system like Zettelkasten is really great. And there's a book called How to Take Smart Notes by Sunker Ahrens, which you can read to learn more about that. So yeah, it does depend on whether you're going down more of an operations route versus more of a research route. But as someone who sort of sits in between those, I really like the fact that I'm kind of building skills in both of those areas because I think they can complement each other.
Fantastic. Okay, so this may overlap a little bit, but what advice would you give to others who might be interested in pursuing a career like the one that you are currently pursuing, or indeed, you know, because you've had so many different hats, you know, like one at Chai or...
Yeah, so I think that this kind of career can be really good for people who are more of a generalist. And it's taken me a long time to admit that about myself, because I think there's something that's kind of idolized about people who are specialists or who are like really experts in like a particular domain. So for ages, I was trying to turn myself into a specialist. Like I started doing a PhD because I was like, I'm going to be an expert in this thing. But I'm just too curious, and I just get too distracted, and like I want to do too many things. And I much prefer having like a kind of bird's eye view of everything rather than going really narrow and deep. So I would say if you're interested in this kind of career, then it probably helps to be a generalist. I think you do want to be someone who is developing a broad set of skills, and just developing your like initiative, I think, is an important thing that I've worked on quite a lot. You know, like being able to organize events without knowing, like basically being able to like figure out how to do a task that you've never done before without too much hand holding, just like being good at like Googling things or looking at resources or getting in touch with people who know how to do it and asking them the right kinds of questions. I think, yeah, building up those kinds of like problem solving skills is super helpful.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's go a little bit into effective altruism. So we have some of the best questions on the questions for Rosie document at the second. So I think what we will do is Rosie and I will chat until about 35 and then move on to that document. And that will sort of dig a little bit deeper into some of these great themes that you've sort of mentioned and talked about. But when did you first become involved in effective altruism? And what was your sort of aha moment, if you had one, with regards to that?
Yeah, it was really strange. So I was in my role at the BBC, and I had just started this project where I was learning machine learning and AI. And I'd always in my life just had like altruistic motivations. I grew up in quite a Catholic household, so there was always like an emphasis on, you know, being a good person and that kind of thing. And when I was at university, I joined like Amnesty International, and there was just always this interest in like trying to do something good for the world, but I never really understood how I could use my own skills and interests to do, you know, useful things. And then one of my friends had just left the BBC to start her own software consulting role. And so she was like making a ton of money, but she felt like she wasn't doing anything useful to the world. And someone told her to read Doing Good Better, because there was this idea of like earning to give. And she was like, oh, okay, maybe I'm earning loads of money now and I can like earn to give and I can still be having a good impact on the world. And so she read Doing Good Better and then was like, Rosie, you need to read this. This is right up your street. And I was like, well, sure, I'll add it to my long list of books to read that I'll get to one day. And she was like, no, you need to read this now. And okay, fine. And then I ended up reading it in 24 hours, which is faster than I read Harry Potter, which is, saying something. So I read that book and I was just like, oh my God, this is so great. It's it kind of meshes my interest in science and quantitative thinking with this sort of more fuzzy thing in my head of being altruistic. And I was like, oh, this is so awesome. But at the time, I just thought like, oh, this is a cool thing, but I don't really know what to do with it, because it's still like in Doing Good Better, it mostly talks about international development and global health as the sort of main EA cause. So that's all I really knew. And then it was only when I was browsing the 80,000 Hours website, which was recommended in the book, then I saw a little box pop up that said, if you have skills in AI, get in touch. And I was like, that's weird. Like, why would they be asking for that? So I just did some more reading and I like sent a message and things. And then I discovered AI safety as a cause area. And I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. Like, finally, there's like a thing I could contribute to with my skills, which is also hopefully good for the world. So I ended up having a coaching session with 80,000 Hours, and they are the ones that turned me towards the role at Chai. And I was like, great, this is it. I know what I need to do now. It was a pretty, I think like I read Doing Good Better at the end of 2016, like over the holidays. And so it was like the beginning of January 2017 where I was like first discovered EA. And then, by June, I had flown over to California to have my interview at Berkeley, because I was just so like, I knew that this is something I needed to do.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible. Yeah, no, I remember this like the very beginning of this period in 2016. Yeah. What did you find particularly like resonating to you about machine learning and artificial intelligence and that field?
Yeah, it's funny because I think a lot of people assume because I'm working in AI safety that I am very much like a long-termist, which is not actually true. I'm pretty unsure about my underlying philosophy on those kinds of questions. So there's a lot of people that I respect who are long-termists and who work in AI for those reasons. So I kind of give that some weight in my head, but personally my intuitions don't really align with that. And actually, like, if I was just going to optimize for what I feel like is the highest impact, I would probably be focusing on more like global health type things. So it's kind of weird, but like, I think the reason that I felt like it made sense for me to go into this was because my skills were much more aligned with it. And I find it super interesting anyway. It's just like an interesting intellectual area. So like balancing my skills, my interests, and also like what could be good for the world, it made sense for me. And yeah, I don't know, I think there's like potentially this idea of like moral trades where like other people might be working in global health because they have the right skills, even if they have more of a long-termist perspective. So I'm hoping that it all kind of, hoping that it all works out somehow. But yeah, I think, yeah, that's basically what my logic was for going into AI. It was mostly a personal fit sort of question. I do still think it is like a super important cause. And I also think that like, even though my intuitions are more like person affecting intuitions, which means that you kind of, you put more moral weight on people who exist and who are definitely going to exist, rather than putting moral weight on creating new people to exist. So even though I lean in that way, I think that existential risk and catastrophic risks are like super important, because I think personally, I think like AI is going to be disruptive within our lifetimes. And I mean, it already is, but you know what I mean, like much more disruptive. And so I think even from a long-termist perspective, it's still a really important area to be working on as well.
So with regards to effective altruism, a thing that I think about a ton is like what I want to see us do in the next 10 years and plus. So if you had like things that you would like EA or indeed like your kind of area of EA to like achieve and go on to do, what would those be? It's probably hard to pick, but
yeah. So I think I have I think like the first thing that comes to mind for me is to try to focus on building robust institutions. I think that a common criticism of EA, which I initially had as well, is that it like focuses a lot on band-aids rather than on systemic change. And I don't think that's actually a fundamental feature of EA like philosophy. I think it's just a limitation of the current systems we have for measuring impact. And so I would really hope in the next 10 years or so that we can get better at understanding how to measure impact for these more like nebulous causes that might have like third order flow through effects. So yeah, I'd be really excited about EA getting better equipped for those kinds of things. And then alongside that, being able to identify good interventions that build robust institutions. So I'm like pretty excited about things like approval voting and charter cities and things like that as ways to experiment and hopefully put us on a more like moving the trajectory towards a more positive path overall. I think I'm generally drawn to more like meta level interventions, which is, I find it really hard to untangle whether I think they are genuinely better for us to do or just ones that I find more interesting. So I'm always a bit cautious about how I talk about it. I think it's a combination of these things. But yeah, I guess ultimately the goal for like the end game is for effective altruism not to have to exist and just to have altruism be effective by default. So that would be like the ultimate place I'd want to get to, but it might take more than 10 years to get to that point.
great. And what do you think some limitations might be on reaching those goals?
Yeah, so one of them I think is this kind of potential for fracture between the people who take a more long-termist stance and the people who are more short-term focused. And I think that something I am trying to advocate for is more like cross collaboration between those perspectives and like I don't know yet whether or not it makes sense to split out into two movements. Maybe that would be better, but I certainly have benefited from EA being a kind of single cohesive movement with a lot of diverse underlying moral philosophies. So from a personal point of view, I'd be a bit disappointed if that happened, and I think it could end up like damaging the impact EA can have if we end up fracturing too much. So that's one thing. I also think the lack of diversity in EA is a problem, and so this is why I'm really excited about initiatives like WANBAM, because there's definitely, I think, a perception of EA as being like a thing for like nerdy young guys, and I think there's also some truth in that. So I'm definitely very excited about initiatives that can help us bring different perspectives and backgrounds to the field, which I think is going to just be beneficial for us, like having a more diverse set of experience and perspectives to draw on.
Great. Yeah, actually, that was one of the reasons I was particularly excited about partnerships on AI, was the collaboration and just the unification of different stakeholders. Yeah, I was really excited to see you guys start that off. Very, very cool. So what projects would you like to see emerge from the EA movement in the coming years, either on those two topic areas or more broadly? Because something that we're doing at the second with, WANBAM is like we're really responsive to like, actually, we're just learning more about how to improve diversity and like how to go about doing this. So I mean, I think it will be really open, in 3 years, what we are doing. Like the mentorship is being received very, very well. But, it's kind of one of those ones that you're trying to be responsive to what people are asking you to fix in a way as well. Any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think going back to what I said about like getting better at measuring systemic change, I would love to see more projects arise in that area. Something I have been thinking a lot about recently is the intersection of ethics with economic principles. So I mentioned earlier about like trying to design incentive structures so that it's in the interests of companies to act in a pro-social way. I would really love to see more work in, now maybe this exists, it feels weird to me that it doesn't exist, but from what I can tell, there's not much work currently in academic philosophy which tries to tie in things like game theory and social choice theory as a way to make sense of ethics and morality. I think there are some pretty big philosophical things that EA needs to figure out, like moral realism, is that a thing or not? And I think that some like drawing in from other fields like economics could help us make more sense of that. So I'd love to see more work going on in that area. And then what else? I think another thing that I'm really excited about is like science reform, or it's sometimes called meta science. So like trying to improve the scientific process. This is kind of related to what I'm working on at PAI, looking at publication norms, but I think more generally things like trying to make science more reproducible and have better incentives and also be more diverse, that kind of thing, I would be really excited about as well.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, and then this is a similar one, but what talent gaps do you think exist in EA at the second? So a thing that we're seeing that I'm just finding like just really wonderful is that, like, you know, I've been around EA for a while, and then I'm looking at the applications for mentorship, and I'm just seeing loads of names I don't know and loads of types of skills that I'm like unfamiliar with, and it's just very exciting to see that kind of build and happen. But like, if an ideal hire came into your office tomorrow, or like the EA community were to like radically scale up along like one particular area or a couple of different areas, what would those areas be for you?
Yeah, I think it's really hard for me to answer this from the perspective of the overall EA community because I only see a narrow slice of it. But something that I am like looking for in the work that I'm doing at the moment is more qualitative research skills. I think EA tends to skew very quantitative, but actually a lot of these areas of work that are about like building consensus or understanding value systems actually benefit from more qualitative methods. So people who studied social science and that kind of thing. So that's one aspect. I think another thing that is underrated in the community is going out and working like outside of EA and building up skills and career capital and that kind of thing, and then becoming more senior outside of EA and then taking those skills and transferring them back into EA. I think a lot of people feel pressure to like immediately work in an EA org, and I'm not even sure that's a good thing because EA in general is a pretty young movement, and a lot of the people running the organizations are also relatively young compared to like the outside world. Obviously that's changing a little bit now, but I think we could benefit from people having a broader variety of experience outside in the world, and then bringing that back into EA.
Awesome. Okay, so we have some fantastic questions. So I'm going to flip over to the audience and start to go down some of these because they're great ones. So what kind of research questions would benefit from a collaboration between philosophers and AI researchers?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things. There's a whole lot of conversation going on at the moment about like preferences and values. We used to talk about value alignment in AI. I mean, some people still use that term, but I've also heard more people talking about like aligning preferences. And I think it's still very unclear like what these mean. And philosophers are the people who've been thinking a lot about this. So that would be a really great collaboration. And then again, going back to this idea of like bringing economic principles in and morality and ethics together, I think is super interesting. A lot of AI work has been influenced by game theory and other economic fields. So bringing in a perspective on ethics, I think could be helpful in like aligning AI with human values or preferences, or however we want to talk about it.
Great. Okay. And then, yeah, we've got some great ones on sort of project management and roles here. So can you say more about possible roles and career paths for people who are interested in roles at the intersection of research and project management? I.e., it seems, so this is an explaining comment, i.e., it seems hard to test fit / get into management roles right off the bat.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So I think there are actually a surprising number of these research project management roles out there, but it's just not the kind of thing that people realize exists, because it's more of a like interdisciplinary thing, and I usually either think about going down a research route or down like a management path. But actually, like most organizations that I know of that do research also have project management roles for that research, and also I think tend to find it like quite hard to find people for those roles. So I think it can be quite a nice niche if you have the right mix of skills, because you need to have like the intellectual ability to engage with the research, but you also need to have these like, you know, like getting stuff done type skills. Yeah, I would suggest, if you're interested in this kind of thing, going through the 80,000 hours job board, or just generally Googling for jobs that are called either research project managers, program managers, program leads. Anything with like project or program in the title is usually a good indication. Even product related roles like product managers is sort of like the commercialized version of this, which I think is a really interesting area to go down, especially if you're interested in like starting a high impact startup, for example. Like getting product management skills could be really good. In terms of testing your fit, yeah, I think there are definitely ways you can test for both the research side and the project management side by doing side projects. So obviously, if you depending on like what you do in your day job, you could, or like at university, you can try and get the other thing by a side project. So if you're lacking the research skills, or if you're not sure if you're good at researching, then like just trying to pick an interesting research question and then write blogs about it is a good way to start. Do some literature reviews, and then like see how you find it writing blog posts on a certain topic. And then if you're keen to test your fit for project management, hosting meetups, like organizing events, starting initiatives, like just experimenting with that kind of thing, I think is a great way to do that. And then in terms of going, like, if your issue is like, oh, how do I go straight from university to one of these roles? Yeah, I think there's probably some truth in the fact that like going directly into a project management role might be tricky, because it sort of implies that you have some experience as a like contributor first, but I'm not sure that's entirely true. Like maybe there are ways to go directly into it, but I think getting a role in either as a researcher or as a research assistant, or going down like a management training program could be a good way to go, like from like as an entry level way to get into it. Or you can do what I did, which is kind of just like do random things and then hope that it all meshes together at some point.
Me too. Yeah, certainly me too on that one. I think that like the starting up new projects and testing out is frequently a good fit, or chatting to people who are already doing projects in the space. Like something that we're sort of working out is, you know, we have a load of need at WANBAM for people who can get stuff done, you know, and I imagine so many projects are the same, and that's definitely been something that we've just kind of learned from interviewing, you know, the people so far, and I think it'll keep cropping up probably, is this sort of just having somebody who is a steady pair of hands and just does stuff.
Gosh, I think reliability is so underrated. Like being a person that I can ask you to do a thing and then not have to worry about whether you'll do it is so great. And I think people really underestimate this. And so having, as I said before, systems in place so that you don't drop balls, and just being good at communicating so that if you are given a task and you are having trouble, like being able to go back and ask questions and clarifications and get what you need, and have the other person know that you'll do that if you run into trouble, rather than just like silently fail and then they have to pick up the pieces. I think those kinds of things are like very much underrated.
Great. And then this is a little bit of a more sort of specific question, and you might have to start by defining this a little bit for me, because I'm not sure. So maybe in the context of GPT-2,
Yeah.
Rosie, firstly, what is GPT-2?
Yeah. So GPT-2 is an advanced language model that OpenAI built in early 2019. And what that means is that it's a machine learning system where you give it a sentence and then it can write an essay in the style of the sentence you gave it. And it kind of, if you look carefully, you can tell it's not written by a human, but it's pretty convincing. So you can give it like a line from a president's speech and it writes the rest of a president's speech. You can give it like a line from a 6-year-old's piece of homework and it will write like a 6-year-old. And yeah, it was pretty controversial because last year when OpenAI built this, instead of releasing the full version of it, they decided to release a limited version, like a smaller version that wasn't as capable. And the reason that they did that was they were worried about it potentially being misused for things like spam or phishing or fake news or like fake Amazon reviews, just anything where like generating convincing sounding human text could be dangerous. So so they made this decision not to release the full version of it, and it caused quite a bit of controversy across the community because a lot of people thought that it was sensationalizing AI, that they were overhyping it, that it was like eroding norms of openness in science. We've worked very hard in science to have an open culture and have papers be accessible and reproducible and these kinds of things. And so when someone suddenly closes the door to that's quite worrying. And so in terms of how I feel about it, I think that it is necessary for us to start exploring ways that we can try and maximize the benefits of openness while also being appropriately cautious. And I think staged release, which is kind of what they did, where they released the smaller version and then a few months later released a larger version and so on. I think that is a potentially fruitful way to go in terms of like trying to get the best of both worlds. I think that there's probably ways that it could have been handled more sensitively. I think they got quite a bit of criticism for kind of releasing it to the press before consulting with academics and things like that. So I think there's like ways that when we started working on this project, we're thinking about like, okay, given that we're going to have to make these difficult trade-offs and compromises, how can we do it in the most like sensitive way possible and bring in the right people at the right time, and how can we coordinate effectively as a community and those kinds of things. And I think they learned a lot from that process, and they've been one of the main contributors to the project that I'm leading at PAI, which has been great. So I think we're moving in a positive direction, and it was an experiment that needed to be done, but I think there are like valid criticisms for how it happened.
Yeah, it's always hard when you're learning on the job as well. So one of the things here is, can you expand on what kind of project you worked for with Amnesty International?
A lot of people think of PAI as an industry group, like just made up of tech companies, but actually I think it's like 60 to 70% of our partners are from non-profits like Amnesty and the ACLU or the Electronic Frontier Foundation, that kind of thing. And so it really is a way to try and balance out the interests of the tech companies to make sure that everything we do is actually in service of the non-profit mission to benefit people in society. So in terms of the kinds of projects that that these organizations get involved with, it can be anything really. Like I don't think Amnesty have engaged on the project I'm working on yet, but I am hoping to pull them in because there's a lot of parallels actually with human rights in terms of balancing the right to privacy with the right to information. So I think they might have some very interesting insights that we can then use and apply to the field of AI. So yeah, there's a whole range, and then some of the other kinds of work that PAI does is on like the use of algorithmic tools for criminal justice, or like for criminal, like assessing whether someone should be released on bail and that kind of thing. And so the ACLU has been pretty active in those kinds of projects that we do too.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. How can primarily technical folks delve into contributing on the policy / strategy or non-technical side?
Yeah, I think this is a great question because I normally get it the other way around, which is like, how can non-technical people contribute to the technical side of AI safety? And I think that It's actually super easy for people with the technical background to go down the more policy strategy career path. I think there's like a real, there's a lot more credibility when you have the technical background. Like I think people take me more seriously because I've, have a computer science degree and I did some machine learning stuff before moving into it. So I think there's like a credibility aspect that's really helpful. And I think just generally being able to understand the features of the technology is like a vastly needed skill at the moment. So like if you think about like these criminal justice issues that I was mentioning where they use algorithmic tools to assess recidivism, I might pronounce that wrongly, but like how likely someone is to commit the crime again. They currently, as I understand it, I may get the details slightly wrong, but as I understand it, the algorithmic tools basically have like a number, which is an arbitrary threshold that the program has just decided on. And if you get above that number, you're like labeled as a criminal or like likely to recommit the crime. And if you get below that, you're not. And it's just like a number like 70 that they just chose. And a lot of the people using these tools do not realize that that's what's happening. Like they see this thing coming out with these proclamations about someone and assume it's somehow objective. And so I think having people who understand at a technical level what is actually going on in these systems and then are able to communicate that to non-technical people so that they can understand that the limitations of these systems that are being used, I think is super, super helpful. I don't know if the question is asking more like, how can they contribute in terms of like, how would you get into it if you're in a technical role currently, but I would be surprised if that wasn't like super easy, because I think I think this is just very much in high demand, like people who have the technical background who are also interested in contributing to the more policy and strategy type questions. So yeah, the usual things, looking at the 8,000 hours job board and stuff like that. I think it shouldn't be too difficult.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and then we've got a couple of like slightly hardbally ones at the bottom, which is great. But feel free just to kind of no comment me if you'd like to. So can you say more about your cause prioritization and why you think global health might be more important than long-termism? Is this mainly informed by person affecting views?
Yeah, I'm really, really uncertain on this, so I don't want it to come across like I'm saying like global health definitely is more important. I think it mostly is to do with my person affecting views. It also is probably to do with me being scope insensitive and just not really being able to conceive of the, like, I think a lot of the arguments that are given for the cause areas like AI are that there's a small chance of it being really important. And I just feel like intuitively that feels weird, and that we are underestimating the resources that we should be putting into the things that we like definitely can see are issues right now and should be fixing those. But I am really, really uncertain on this, and like I kind of flip and just, yeah, the more I read about it, the more confused I get.
I really don't know the answer to this one. And, WANBAM is kind of my baby project on, diversity and inclusion within EA. But do you think EA organizations should have diversity quotas?
Yeah, I think diversity quotas can be like a necessary evil in some cases. I think in an ideal world we wouldn't have them. The way I sort of think about it is if we currently have systems in place that are causing us to miss out on good candidates because they don't fit our mold of what we expect. So if we have unconscious biases that make us like more likely to choose a male candidate over a female candidate, even if the female candidate is slightly better qualified, if that's the case, then I think we would be better if we put some rules in place that like try to compensate for that, so that we actually choose the best candidate. So I get frustrated when people say that like, oh, we shouldn't have diversity quotas, we should just choose the best person for the job, because I think the point is we want the best person for the job, but we're not always getting them because we have these potentially systemic or unconscious biases that are making that a problem. So I think to the extent that they can help compensate for that, it can be a tool that if we use it thoughtfully, it could help. But in an ideal world, we would get to a point where we just remove the biases or the structural issues that have led to this disparity in the first place, and then we can have a world where we don't need them.
Yeah. Okay, and then another question back on scientific publishing communities. So do you think other scientific publishing communities will slowly model the machine learning / artificial intelligence communities? And I apologize if I pronounce this wrong. ARVICs, reproductibility, Rosie? Open source science.
Yeah.
Thank you. Open source science, free to publish and read, no paywalls. Is this the right way to do science and make progress? How long would this take?
Yeah, so it's funny because like on one hand I am like so pro open science and like love the move towards archive and having no paywalls and things like that, and then on the other hand I'm also like, oh, but we do need to be a bit cautious about the information we're disseminating. But I think I really would love to see more scientific communities model the machine learning communities approach to this, and it was quite interesting that the machine learning community was able to do this. They basically like went like against centuries of tradition of publishing in journals where you have to pay to publish and pay to access and things like that. And they were just like, we're just going to skip all that and start publishing on this site called Archive where everything is open and free. And so that was pretty cool. And I think it probably is likely that other fields will go that route too. One thing that I'm really interested in is like mechanisms that can, like, so journals exist for legacy reasons and they played like a function at that time, and I think we need to be careful about eliminating them completely without making sure we have structures in place that like serve the purpose that the journals were meant to serve. And I think one interesting idea that I've heard before is to try and tie the grant making process to the publishing process. So when you apply for a grant, the person who funds it, or the organization that funds it, should also commit to publishing the work no matter what the result, because at the moment we have this issue where research gets funded and then if a result is found that isn't like exciting enough or is not statistically significant or whatever, it's not published, and then we don't know when that research, we don't know that that research has been done and has found like a null result. So I think tying the grant making process to the publishing process so that we have more aligned incentives and we have more like all the research will get published. I think those kinds of interventions could be really helpful, and so that's like an example of a project in EA that I would really like to see.
Awesome. So 2 final questions from me, but how do you go about like balancing off the interests and like getting people from such varying backgrounds to work successfully together? Because I've worked now with, you know, human rights organizations, you know, of varying degrees. Like my background is originally, you know, as you know, human rights and international law, and specifically women's human rights. And it, you know, you're trying to sort of align like such kind of different communities. Like, how do you go about bringing everybody together? Or are they together already? And, you know, like, how does it work?
Yeah, this is a really tough thing. It's kind of the thing that is most difficult about my job, but also one of the most rewarding things, I think, as well. As I mentioned before, usually the individuals working at these organizations share similar motivations. Like for the most part, especially if they're involved with PAI work, they generally care about the world and want to make it better and are worried about AI and want to put things on a better path. So I think like it can be really inspiring to have an event where you have people from all these different perspectives, and like in theory shouldn't be getting along, but actually do, because they are like people who care about the same things underneath it all. I do think it can be difficult when people are subject to pressures like either from their organization or otherwise. And something that PAI has done in the past is like, if we might go into a project thinking, right, we're going to write a paper that is going to be authored by this huge variety of people and everyone's going to stand behind what we say and be like, yes, we all agree with this. And then that just isn't possible because you can never get that level of consensus across these different perspectives. So what we end up doing is like publishing something like, here is the conversation that we had, here are the different points that we raised, like most people agreed with this statement, but there were some aspects of dissent, and then we kind of make that as transparent as possible. So I think, yeah, it's not always possible to get consensus, but I think it is possible to have productive disagreement and move towards like, you know, a better like move towards an answer or move towards a better system, even though we don't all 100% agree.
Yeah, consensus building. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much. Great. Okay, so final question from me is just a quick wrap-up question, which is for junior people who like want to go and pursue a career like yours, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I'm probably going to repeat myself a bit, but I think like don't feel pressured to have it all figured out. I think I don't know, sometimes I'm like, am I lucky that I didn't discover EA while I was at university or not? Because I think if I had, I'd have felt under so much pressure to like do something high impact immediately, and that actually might have been worse off. So I think like trying not to worry about like having it all figured out, and just generally like this is talked about a lot at the moment in EA, but you know, you're trying to maximize the overall impact of your career, not like the immediate impact, and I think that's super important. Something that I have found difficult in my life is disentangling what I personally want from what others expect or what others think is high value or prestigious or whatever. And it's taken me a long time to feel comfortable like trying, and I'm still not 100% there, like trying to tease out exactly what I care about and exactly my perspectives, and not just defer to the opinions of experts. So I think yeah, trying to spend some time introspecting about what you care about and what you're good at and what you enjoy and what you think is important and what your moral values are is very important. I think like also kind of related to all this is like the compound effect of building small habits and doing small things that ultimately will result in big payoffs down the line. So thinking a bit more long term about your career and your life, and not trying to do everything immediately, but just like putting these small pieces in place now and getting into good habits and building skill, like meta level skills now that will end up paying off down the line, I think is really valuable.
Awesome. Okay, so Rosie, let's call it. But yeah, it's just been an absolute pleasure to like A, watch your career grow, and B, just chat to you today. Thank you so much for everything with WANBAM and just chatting to us.
Yeah, you have been such a great supporter, and I really appreciate everything you're doing for the community as well. So thank you so much for having me and for doing it.